of the Qianlong Emperor. So this painting went into great collections in the late period, but it went in because it was attributed to Li Gonglin, not because of what it was. Now we come to what the painting really is. We know from one of the inscriptions that, in fact, the artist was an artist named Li, 12th century, anonymous 12th century really, from Shecheng in Anhui province, painting in the 1160s. Li Gonglin was from there, which allowed them to make this wrong attribution to him and to interpolate this inscription at the end, which we'll see. As I say, it's in the Tokyo National Museum. In the inscription, the artist is referred to simply as Li Sheng, or Mr. Li, in one of the early colophons. The earliest colophon is dated 1170. So the painting was probably done in the 1160s, and we know it was done for a Buddhist monk commissioned by him, according to the inscription. So the painting is, in some sense, a professional work. We would know this, I think, anyway, from the sheer technical accomplishment of it. This isn't the way the amateurs paint, not the way they can paint. Li Gonglin couldn't touch it. And as I say, it was preserved, really, and commanded a kind of near worship in later times because of the Li Gonglin Association. Okay, other people can differ on that appraisal, but it's mine anyway. Okay, now, here we go, the beginning of the scroll, distant hills, misty hills in the distance. I have pretty good slides, except they've been badly treated, and there are bad smudges and scratches and so on them. I photographed it long ago, decades ago, in the Tokyo National Museum. So I'll show my slides, but I will apologize for the smudges and scratches and all the rest. Here at the beginning, you can see, as I say, the writing on the mounting by Dongqi Chang of the 16th, early 17th century, and seals of famous people, and distant hills. Now, the next, please. Here is the second section, and we continue without really much happening. And you wonder, why is this going to be such a wonderful painting? Well, wait and see. Great big seal of the Emperor, Qianlong period, 18th century, and a little bit in the far distance you can see, if you look very hard, you can see what is probably a building silhouette, and you can see a boat with people just to the right and a little bit below the far distance. But look at this thing of trees in the foreground. It doesn't look like so much here, but let's go and look at it in detail. Now, here's the detail. Now you begin to see why this is a wonderful painting. Imagine trying to paint this, accomplishing this kind of range of ink tonality within these small areas, and doing it in a way that doesn't show any calligraphic hand of the artist. That isn't what the painting is about at all. Instead, it's a rendering of how things would look seen from a distance. But we're back to this idea of perception rather than intellectual understanding. Okay, and here, let me put beside it a slide, one of my Huangshan slides of pines and mist, just to remind you of what things look like in the mist. Well, it isn't really like the Xiaoshang picture, but at least you can see how in the foreground a pine tree is readable with its branches and so on, and then they become progressively dimmer as you go back and so on. But a bunch of trees seen in the mist, as rendered by this artist, is really quite wonderful. Okay, on. Here in a further section, and you notice, by the way, that where the joins of the paper are, people put their seals, especially this Gao Shiqi, a great 17th century collector. And this is so the painting can't be separated. People would sometimes take parts of the painting and mount them separately and sell them separately and so on. But the seal somehow authenticates the joins and shows it to be all there. Well, okay, we're coming to a land mass, finally. Quiet painting still. And here are the great big seal of this 18th century emperor and his writing. Oh, he writes and writes. He wrote hundreds or thousands of inscriptions. Probably had a lot of them composed for him. Doggerel rhymes, and anyway. And then you see the main part of the painting. And what it is a quite wonderfully composed scene of hills or ridges curving interlocking, moving together, moving back, and rivers flowing or streams flowing in valleys, and groves of trees growing smaller as you go back, and dimming as you go back. Anyway, this is a section of the main section of the hand scroll, as complex in its way as a section of a great hanging scroll, because there's so much going on in it, as we'll see. It's, as I say, strongly composed, but also quite wonderful in detail, as we'll see as we go on. Okay, anyway, now here's the section just before we reach that main place. Let me talk a bit now about, while we gaze at this, about the Xiaoshan region. As I've said before, I think, and I hope I won't have to say it again, the person to read on this about the Xiaoshan and all the poetry connected with it is Alfreda Merck. She has done wonderful studies of Chinese poetic painting and poetry in painting and Song Dynasty poetic themes in painting. Some of the best of this was associated with an artist who, I think I said this in the previous lecture, whose work doesn't survive, but there is a 12th century painting of the Xiaoshan 8 views in the Princeton Art Museums that she wrote about. Okay, anyway, and I will show more Xiaoshan pictures at the end of this course. Great paintings done by 2 Chan or Zen Buddhist artists, Mu Chi and Yu Jian. At any rate, the Xiaoshan region properly is more a region than a single place, is the convergence of 2 rivers, named the Xiao and the Shang, in Hunan province. In practice, it refers to southern Hunan area up to Lake Dongting, which is north of Changsha. This is lush, watery scenery associated in a literary way with the famous poet Chu Yuan, active from around 343 to around 278 BC. He committed suicide. You know the story. Okay, now in this painting, the painter captures the sense of distant contemplation of this kind of landscape. That is the experience of gazing at the scenery through atmosphere at a distance. So it can be abbreviated. And as you come in closer, you see there's quite a bit going on in the painting. You don't see it first. Now there's a tree grove in the middle right here, and just to the left of it, a pathway which eventually goes across a bridge. And you see a figure there on the bridge. And the figure is arriving at a cluster of houses among the trees over here in the middle left. Well, the painting is full of details of this kind, hidden, partly hidden, and only visible as in fact it would be in real visual experience as you look longer and you begin to see things you didn't see at first. Okay, then a bit further on, here's the beginning of that main group of ridges or hills that make up the main part of the painting. And here you can see in the foreground houses with actual figures. And you see them very dimly and simply. Thatched houses, figures in a kind of village here. And again, really wonderful drawings of tree groves. Now the marvel of this is that you see these not as they would be understood, as they might be painted by a early painter, tree plus tree plus tree, but seen as a whole grove, a visual unit, a tree grove, wonderfully, wonderfully caught. God, you can't think of anything like this in European art until you get way, way up into the 19th century or so. Okay, anyway, I won't keep going that, making that point. It's pretty obvious. Now let's see. Oh, here, closer up. Yeah, here's the village. Somebody carrying something over his shoulder. Somebody here directing a servant, I guess, outside the houses, and thatched houses, and seen through the trees. You, as I say, imagine painting this. Imagine somehow laying on the ink in such this somewhat blurry way that reproduces the experience of gazing through atmosphere at the scenery. Okay, next. Now here's the main section again. I'll leave this on while I read something. This kind of achievement was not entirely unrecognized in its time. A late 12th century writer who's quoted by Max Luhr, page 210 of Luhr's book, writes this, quote, "Mountains in rain, mountains in sunshine, the painters have no difficulty in depicting them. But phenomena like fair weather turning to rain, or rain about to cease, the fog at night, the mist at evening as it parts and then closes again, a vista obscured, appearing no sooner than being submerged into nothingness. These are difficult to depict, unless it be an artist of marvelous ability, recognized in the world, one whose concepts transcend the ordinariness of things. He certainly cannot attain it," end quote. That's the translation by Laura, I guess. Anyway, but the point is the painter of this wasn't recognized. He's known only through the early colophons on this marvelous work. And the painting itself is preserved and highly praised only because it was falsely turned into the work of Li Guanglin, an artist who, for all his other strengths, and I'm not denying them, was way short of the ability to paint something like this. Shimada reproduced in this painting, associated it with Mio Run. But again, Mio Run couldn't touch this. He couldn't begin to. He didn't have that kind of sheer ability. Okay, I'm being biased, but I'm being biased in a way I think that fits the paintings. Chinese collectors were deliberately gullible in accepting misleading attributions and signatures. They wanted big names. They wanted a Li Guanglin painting. They didn't want a painting by some anonymous guy in the mid-12th century working in Shoshan named Mr. Li. C.C. Wang always told me, I remember very well, if it's a great painting, then it has to be by a great artist. And by the great artist, he meant some recorded great artist. So it had to be by a big name, or else he wasn't interested. Well, I've taken a very different view. It seems, on the basis of the paintings as they were preserved, and the way I'm presenting them anyway, some of the best are in fact done by artists we don't know a thing about. Well, you see how the artist carries us back from the foreground with relatively clear and distinct tree groups and detail and so on. The village down here on the lower right carries us back through progressively dimmer and less detailed passages systematically. I'll put beside that one another of my Huangshan photos, which brings this out very well, I think. From the lower right, where you see a rock and tree, very detailed, or around the bottom on the lower left, going back to progressively dimmer and progressively less detailed passages. So our artist is presenting something that is visually true, among other things. That's not all he's doing, but that's one of the things he's doing. We can believe it. Now, again, to go in and look a bit closer. Here in the foreground of that section, a house or a little pavilion by the water again, and further back a boatman in a boat, and further beyond that a bridge. Again, something survives of that more you look, the more you see thing. Now here again, this is for the left side, rolling further, of that main mass, and the river flowing out of the distance. And on the left here, sort of middle left, you can see a passage with trees in the foreground and houses sort of built up the hillside. And then on the left over here, we see a boat with figures. I'll show details of those. Here, the same thing up closer. The grove of trees and a ridge behind that winds upward and connects with ridges behind. And then on the hillside is this passage of houses coming in still closer. Shoreline, the boat off on the left, and the space of the painting is really very convincing. The artist doesn't create space in complicated ways in the way a Six Dynasties artist or some earlier artist might do. He does it all very easily.